Okay, diagnosing your ABS, a little more difficult since I don't have any parts here to demonstrate some of the diagnostics on. I don't have an actual vehicle with ABS here, so I can demonstrate the use of a scan tool. As you've seen in one of my other videos, all my cars are older. None of them have ABS. The only vehicle in the driveway that has ABS is the semi that my brother drives, and that is a completely different system. So, the ABS does is, I gotta zoom out from that a little bit. Alright, when you're diagnosing your ABS, first thing you should notice is, does the ABS kick on during slow speeds, say 15-20 miles an hour or less? If it does, that's an indication of a wheel speed sensor going bad. Now, that's a very difficult problem to find. The best way to diagnose that is if it's got an external sensing wheel, and an external sensor would be to take a look at the wheel, make sure there's no missing teeth, it's not rusted up, there's no damaged teeth on the wheel. And the next thing to do is to disconnect your ABS sensor with the vehicle up in the air a little ways, whether it's on a jack or on a lift at a shop, and connect the voltmeter set on AC voltage to the two wires coming out of your sensor. And when you connect that, you spin the wheel, and you should see on a good sensor, at least for the GMs, spec I know right off the top of my head, it's going to be somewhere around 100 millivolts or more. And then you also want to check your resistance of that sensor. Now you can do this same test checking the voltage and the resistance on the wheel hubs that have the sensors and the tooth wheel enclosed. But you can't examine the tooth wheel, you can't examine the sensor other than just doing the tests on them. Now in this particular Pontiac Aztec, and I believe for most GMs, if you want to measure the resistance of your ABS sensor, it should be between 800 and 1600 ohms. If it's not within those specs, then you've got a problem with that sensor. Now, as far as four-wheel drive vehicles, they don't usually have hubs in the rear end. They don't. Now, a two-wheel drive vehicle will have a hub, or will have a sensor mounted into the rear differential, but a four-wheel drive vehicle will have it mounted into the back of the transfer case. So you need to pay particular attention to that when you're looking for your wheel speed sensors and trying to diagnose them. Because if you don't see it on the rear end of on the rear axle of the vehicle, when it's a rear-wheel drive or four-wheel drive truck, then make sure it's not four-wheel drive, and if it is, find the appropriate sensor mounted on the back of the transfer case. And now those vehicles, while they still have four-wheel ABS, it's not as effective and efficient as a vehicle with four-wheel ABS that has a wheel speed sensor at each wheel. But on any vehicle with four-wheel ABS, you still have two sensors on the front wheels and at least one sensor on the rear, depending on whether or not it's a rear-wheel drive vehicle or a front-wheel drive vehicle. And checking the sensors is relatively the same. You can check for an AC voltage, you can check for your resistance at them. The next step to finding an ABS problem is to examine the wiring of the wheel speed sensors. Now, 9 times out of 10, it's either a bad bearing or a broken wire, or somebody has cut a wire going to one of the wheel speed sensors, if not all of them. It's a relatively common problem to see in the shop. Somebody will cut the ABS wires because there's a problem with it. So that's in a nutshell the things you want to look for at first. But once you do that, you want to find an appropriate wiring diagram, either through one of the repair manuals such as Haynes or Chilton, or if you know somebody who works in a shop, have them pull one up off a wiring diagram up off of the computer software that most shops use to help diagnose vehicles and provide them wiring diagrams, specifications. Now, I happen to have one of those computer programs here at home, and I've also got access to it at work, which is very, very helpful when you're diagnosing any vehicle, even an older carbureted vehicle. But you want to find, the next step for diagnosing it is you want to find your wiring diagram, disconnect the connector at your ABS module, big fat connector that plugs into here, and determine which two wires go to which wheel speed sensor, and you want to measure the resistance of your wheel speed sensor through those wires to determine whether or not your wiring is good. And if your wiring is good and your wheel speed sensor is good, then the only next step to it is that there's more than likely a problem with your ABS control unit. Now, many vehicles, the EBCM part right here, this is available separately from your hydraulic unit, and that is just for ease of repair, because if you buy them both together, it's going to cost you anywhere from $300 to $500 from a dealership. If you just buy the electronic unit, it'll cost you anywhere from $75 to $150. So it's pretty much like half the price at the high end for just replacing the electronic portion of it. Now, your best bet, though, before you go replacing any major components such as your ABS control module, is always to have your vehicle checked out and diagnosed by a properly certified mechanic, someone who's trained in ABS, knows the ins and outs of the system, and has all the specific tools such as a scan tool for the diagnostic checking and stuff like that. So after that, I mean, it kind of gets really murky as to what's going on, but there are a few other easily identifiable symptoms that have a relatively quick fix. Now, if you have a Ford or a Chevy truck and you hear a motor running constantly, when the key's off, when the key's on, now there's two things you can do. Number one, the two common ones on the Chevy trucks is either the blower motor for your heater and air conditioning, or the ABS pump motor. And the ways to check that is to either go in your fuse box and pull out the fuse for the heater and AC or the relay, and if the motor stops running, well, then you have a heater and AC problem. But if it stays running, try pulling out the fuse for your ABS. If the motor stops running, then you know it's in the ABS. And of all times I've seen that problem on the Ford and Chevy trucks that use the Kelsey Hayes ABS system, it's always the electronic module for the ABS. It's constantly commanding the pump motor to run even though it's not needed. So now if you disconnect the two wires, you know, these two wires right here coming off the pump, coming off the motor, that go to the EBCM, and put the fuse back in, and you don't have that problem anymore. Now, my best suggestion though is, depending on how long it's been going on, you may want to replace the entire unit, the hydraulic unit and the EBCM, because when that motor runs, it gets very hot. It can deteriorate the grease that's in there to lubricate the bearings inside the motor. It can damage the brushes. It's just, when it's working and running for long periods of time, it gets extremely hot. So you may want to consider that when you're doing it. Also, be careful not to touch the motor itself on the hydraulic unit while you're doing this, because you can severely burn yourself due to the fact that it gets so hot. But if you unplug that and it stops running, you can, you know, put your fuse back in for the ABS if you haven't already done so, and it'll drive like a normal vehicle. Even without the ABS fuse, it'll drive like a vehicle with normal brakes. Now, you won't have the anti-lock capabilities, you know, in wet or snowy weather, but it will still drive and stop like any vehicle normally would. You just don't have the capability of preventing the wheels from locking up, which, no offense to you guys out there, but there are some people that really, really need that ABS capability because they can't drive for crap. So if you have the problem with your ABS motor running constantly, it's almost always your EBCM, because there is this wire coming off the pump motor is so short, it's really impossible for it to get shorted out on something and get power to it or get a constant ground to it. Now, that's pretty much the only things there are to diagnosing an ABS system yourself. Now, there are other problems that can arise from ABS, such as air getting trapped in the system, or there's codes for a bad module. So not all of these diagnoses are going to fix that, which is why I recommend, before you attempt any home repairs on your ABS system, you consult a service manual and you go have a professional mechanic who is knowledgeable of the way ABS works check out your system using the proper tools and equipment to verify the problem. And that's pretty much all I got for you on ABS.